People always say tragedy announces itself with thunder, but mine came quietly. On a bright Sunday morning, while the radio played love songs and the scent of pancakes filled the kitchen. My name is Margaret Holloway, and I am 78 years old. But in my heart, I am still that woman from 1985, the one who hung wet laundry in the yard while her baby disappeared from the bathtub. Back then, I lived in a small house near Seaside, Oregon. I worked at the town library, stamping return dates on old novels and helping children find picture books. I was 40 and tired, a widow raising my 6-month-old son, Ethan. My husband, Daniel, a police officer, had died before Ethan was born. I thought I had already suffered enough for one lifetime. I had no idea what was coming. Ethan was the kind of baby who laughed with his whole body. His eyes were the color of morning fog, and when he smiled, I felt alive again. But motherhood is heavy when you carry it alone. I worked all day, came home exhausted, and still had to wash, cook, and rock him to sleep. My neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, saw how worn out I was and said, "Maggie, you need help. There's a young woman at the church, a sweet soul, polite, good with children." That was how Rebecca Hale entered my life. 23, quiet, hair tied neatly, a voice like a whisper. She said she came from Idaho, from a church home, and wanted honest work. Her eyes were too calm for someone her age, but I saw that as maturity. I let her hold Ethan, and he giggled right away. That should have scared me. He never giggled with strangers. Instead, I felt relief. I thought God had finally sent someone kind. Rebecca started the next day. She moved like she'd always lived there, folding blankets, singing softly, tidying the kitchen. Ethan adored her. When I came home from work, he would stretch his little arms toward her instead of me. I told myself it was fine. Love shared is not love lost. That's what I believed back then. The first few weeks passed peacefully. She kept a small notebook with his feeding times, naps, and even which lullabies soothed him. She prayed before meals, left flowers by the window, and never asked for more pay. Once she told me, "He's such a blessing, Miss Holloway. It feels like he's part of me." I laughed. I shouldn't have. A month later, she began asking strange questions, quiet, careful ones. "Do you have any relatives who visit often? Any photos of his father? Does the baby have identification papers?" I thought she was just curious. I answered without thinking. She smiled that calm, unreadable smile and changed the subject. On May 19th, 1985, it was unusually warm. The sky was bright, the kind of blue that hurts your eyes. Ethan woke early, crawling across the floor, chasing a wooden rattle. I was washing dishes when Rebecca said, "You've done enough this week, Miss Holloway. Let me bathe him while you hang the laundry. You'll come back to a clean baby." I didn't hesitate. I kissed his forehead and said, "Be good, my little man." The water was already running when I stepped outside with the basket. I remember the sound, steady, comforting. I started humming, pegging shirts on the line, feeling the wind on my face. 15 minutes later, silence. I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep, but when I came back inside, the first thing I noticed was the dry floor. No steam, no sound of water, just silence so thick it pressed on my chest. "Rebecca?" I called. No answer. I checked the bathroom. The tub was empty. The baby's towel was gone. I ran to the bedroom. The crib stood open, blanket missing. Her shoes, her coat, the little suitcase she brought, all gone. That's when my world cracked. I ran out into the street barefoot, screaming, "She took him! She took my baby!" Neighbors came running, confused, frightened. Someone called the police. I remember falling to my knees, the gravel cutting my skin, the taste of iron in my mouth from biting my tongue. The officers arrived, asked questions, wrote things down, promised to search. But I saw in their eyes. They didn't believe me. They thought I was tired, maybe delusional, a single mother under stress. By sunset, the search had begun, but I already knew they wouldn't find her. Rebecca had planned everything, the questions, the timing, even the trust she'd built. That night, I sat in Ethan's room, staring at the empty crib, still hearing his laugh echoing against the walls. I touched the tiny blue blanket she left behind, the one with the embroidered initials E.B. Ethan Brooks, and swore I'd never stop looking for him. I didn't know it would take 38 years, but I remember every sound of that day, the hum of the radio, the flap of wet sheets, the running water that stopped too soon. I remember because that was the moment my life ended and another began, a life built entirely on the hope of seeing my son again. That night, the whole town knew. News traveled faster than the police cars. By morning, people were already whispering at the bakery and pretending not to stare when I passed by. The posters with Ethan's picture went up before sunrise. His round cheeks, his fog-colored eyes, the small birthmark behind his ear. I walked the streets barefoot, showing the photo to strangers like a madwoman. The police came and went, asking the same questions again and again. When did you last see the nanny? What was her full name? Any friends? Any family? My answers never changed. I knew almost nothing about Rebecca Hale, and that was the problem. I had opened my home to a ghost. By the third day, her trail was cold. The bus station clerk said he'd seen a young woman carrying a baby wrapped in a blue blanket, boarding a Greyhound headed south. But there were no tickets under her name, no records, nothing. The officers told me, "We'll keep searching, Mrs. Holloway," but their tone had already shifted. I could hear the doubt in it. On the fourth day, I found myself sitting in the police station, my hands shaking, while a detective asked, "Are you sure you didn't give the child away?" The question hit me like a brick. "What kind of monster do you think I am?" I shouted. He didn't even flinch. He just said, "People do strange things under pressure." When I left the station, I could feel eyes following me. A man at the gas station whispered to another, "That's her, the one who lost the baby." I wasn't Maggie from the library anymore. I was the woman who might have done something terrible. The local paper printed a short article. "Infant disappears in Seaside. Police investigating possible negligence." No one mentioned Rebecca's name. No one blamed her. It was easier to blame the mother. Days turned into weeks. I stopped sleeping. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard a baby cry, only to realize it was the wind. I left the porch light on every night, thinking maybe, by some miracle, someone would bring him back. Mrs. Callahan was the only one who still came by. She'd bring food I never ate and say, "You need to rest, Maggie." But how could I rest when my son's blanket was still on the bed, untouched, smelling like milk and soap? A month later, the search officially ended. The officer came with a clipboard and said the words that hollowed me out completely. "No new leads. Case remains open." That meant we've given up. I didn't. I couldn't. I began searching myself. I sold my husband's watch to pay for gas and drove through every small town between Seaside and the California border. I went to churches, orphanages, hospitals. I asked every nurse, every volunteer, if they had seen a baby with gray-blue eyes and a faint mark behind his ear. Most looked at me with pity, some with fear. Once, outside a church in Redding, a priest told me maybe God wanted him for a reason. I wanted to scream, God didn't steal him, she did. But I just turned and walked away. 3 months later, a woman from the post office handed me a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sentence typed on an old typewriter. He's alive, don't stop looking. I carried that letter in my pocket for years. By the fall, I had lost my job. The library replaced me. They said they needed stability. I didn't argue. I spent my days at the police station begging them to reopen the case. One sergeant finally snapped and said, Mrs. Holloway, we've checked everything. Maybe she took him across the border. Maybe it's time to accept it. Accept it. As if losing a child was something you could sign off like a bill. Winter came, harsh and wet. The ocean near Seaside froze at the edges, and I thought, maybe this is what my heart looks like now. I barely spoke to anyone. People crossed the street when they saw me. A few teenagers once shouted from a truck, Where's your baby, Maggie? I didn't even answer. I had learned that silence hurt them more than words. One night in December, a police officer named Tom Whitaker stopped by. He wasn't on duty. He came as a human being. I have a daughter your boy's age, he said quietly. We'll keep an eye out, I promise. He gave me his card. I never forgot that kindness. But kindness doesn't fill an empty crib. In January 1986, I stood in front of the church where I'd first met Rebecca and stared at the closed doors, the same doors she had walked through with her false smile and soft hands. I realized then, no one was coming to save me. If I wanted justice, I would have to find it myself. That was the day I stopped praying and started remembering every small detail I'd ignored. The strange calls she received, the bruises on her wrist, the way she flinched when I mentioned police. I knew there was a truth buried somewhere behind those calm brown eyes, and I swore I'd uncover it, even if it took the rest of my life. It did. The first year after Ethan vanished was a blur of faces, questions, and dead ends. I stopped marking the calendar. The seasons passed, but my days looked the same. Coffee gone cold on the table, the porch light burning through every night, and the crib untouched in the corner of my room. I lived waiting for a knock that never came. After the police gave up, I kept looking on my own. I took the bus to small towns up and down the coast, showing his photo to gas station clerks, grocery cashiers, church volunteers. Some people shook their heads kindly, others turned away, uncomfortable. A few even said, "Maybe you should move on." Those words felt like slaps. You don't move on from your own blood. I pinned a map to my wall and marked every rumor I heard. Once, someone told me a woman matching Rebecca's description had been seen near Sacramento with a baby boy. I drove there in a borrowed car, slept in the back seat, searched shelters and clinics. Nothing. Every time hope rose, it fell harder, but I couldn't stop. Stopping would mean admitting he was gone. By the second year, I'd sold everything of value. My wedding ring, Daniel's uniform badge, even the car he left behind. I spent it all chasing whispers. The more I searched, the smaller my world became. Friends avoided me. Some thought I was crazy. The ladies at church stopped visiting, embarrassed by the shadow I carried. Only Mrs. Callahan remained loyal, but she was old and frail. One day, she said gently, "Maggie, grief will eat you alive if you let it." I just nodded. I was already half gone. When Mrs. Callahan died in '88, I didn't even go to the funeral. I stood at my window, watching the cars line up at the church, the same place that had brought Rebecca into my life. I couldn't step inside that building ever again. It smelled of betrayal. Years crawled by. The posters faded. The town forgot. But I never did. Every birthday, I baked a small cake, one candle more each year, and left it on the kitchen table, untouched. My neighbors must have thought I'd lost my mind, but it kept me breathing. I told myself Ethan was somewhere out there, growing older, blowing out his own candles under a different name. In 1992, I received another letter, no return address, just like the first. It said, "He's in California." She calls him Luke. I drove south again chasing that name. There were dozens of Lukes, hundreds of lies. I visited a school in Fresno where a teacher told me, "Ma'am, please stop coming here." I left crying in the parking lot. The police said the letters were probably cruel jokes, but I kept every one. I still have them in a box labeled Hope. By the late '90s, I was a stranger in my own town. The library had new employees who didn't remember my name. People whispered when I passed, "That's the woman from the baby case." Some even said I'd sold my child, that I made it all up for attention. Gossip has a way of killing what pain can't. I started avoiding the market, walking at night when no one could see me. In 2001, after a storm, I found one of Ethan's baby shoes washed out from under the porch. The blue had faded, but the tiny initials EB were still stitched inside. I sat on the wet steps, clutching that shoe, and realized 20 years had passed since I last saw him. 20 years of searching, hoping, dreaming the same nightmare. My hands shook as I whispered, "I'm still here, baby. I'm still waiting." I tried to rebuild my life, but nothing fit anymore. I worked part-time at a thrift store, surrounded by other people's memories. Every box of old toys, every worn blanket felt like a message. I'd lift them and wonder if someone else's mother was missing her child too. Sometimes I'd imagine Ethan walking in, grown up now, asking, "Do you remember me?" I'd wake from those daydreams with tears I didn't feel coming. When I turned 60, my sister Helen convinced me to move to Arizona with her. "You need sunshine," she said. I lasted 2 months. The desert felt wrong, too dry, too silent. I missed the ocean, the wind, the cry of the gulls. I went back to Seaside and bought a tiny mobile home on the edge of town. It was all I could afford, but it was close to where he was taken, and I couldn't leave the place where his last laugh had echoed. As the years stretched, technology changed. People got computers, cell phones, the internet. I started checking missing persons websites at the library, typing "male born 1982 Oregon" into search bars that led nowhere. But each click kept me alive. Sometimes I'd find a photo that almost looked like him, the eyes, the jawline, and my heart would leap. Then I'd zoom in, realize it wasn't him, and feel that same hollow drop I'd felt 30 years before. I never remarried. There were a few kind men, one who even asked me to move in with him, but I couldn't. How do you share a life when half your heart is buried in the past? I told them, "I'm waiting for someone." They thought I meant a husband. I didn't explain. Then one afternoon in 2018, while cleaning, I found the old Polaroid, the last photo I ever took of Ethan, sitting on the kitchen floor with a pot and a wooden spoon. I hadn't looked at it in years. His smile still had that small dimple on the left side. I pressed the photo to my chest and felt something shift inside me. Not peace, but a strange kind of readiness. I thought, if I'm going to die without answers, I want the world to at least remember his name. So I went to a local reporter. I told her everything. Rebecca's lies, the disappearance, the silence that followed. She listened, took notes, said she'd publish it. The article ran a week later. The Forgotten Case of Baby Ethan Brooks. For the first time in decades, people stopped me on the street not to gossip, but to say they remembered. A few leads came in, all false again, but something was different this time. The world was connected now. Stories could travel far. Maybe, I thought, maybe this will reach him. Maybe he'll see it. I didn't know that. Just a few years later, that hope would stop being a dream. Because in 2023, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I turned on the television and saw my son's face. It was a Tuesday like any other. The kettle was hissing, and I was knitting a blanket I'd probably never finish. The television was just background noise, some afternoon show about people searching for their biological families. I almost turned it off. Those stories were too close to my own, and hope is a dangerous thing when you've lived in pain for nearly 40 years. Then I heard the host say a name. Mark Jensen. Something in that voice froze me. I looked up. A man appeared on screen, around 40, tall, dark hair, the same gray-blue eyes that had haunted my dreams. My heart stopped. I leaned closer. His smile. It was Daniel's. His eyes. They were mine. I dropped the knitting needles. They clattered on the floor. The room spun. The man was speaking calmly, explaining that after his adoptive mother had passed away, he'd found old documents and photographs that didn't match his birth certificate. He said he'd been adopted by a church volunteer named Sarah Hale. Sarah Hale. I nearly choked. Rebecca's name came rushing back like a ghost whispering in my ear. Rebecca Hale. She had simply changed the first name. The host asked him what he hoped to find. He said, "I just want to know who I really am. I think I was taken as a baby. If anyone recognizes me, please contact the station." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, like I was drowning in memories. The way his jaw clenched when he spoke. Daniel used to do that when he was nervous. I pressed a hand to my chest, whispering, "It's you. Ethan." I stayed frozen until the show ended, staring at the blank screen. I didn't move for hours. When my neighbor Linda knocked later that evening to bring soup, she found me sitting like a statue. "Margaret, what's wrong?" she asked. I could barely get the words out. "He's alive, Linda. My boy. He's alive." She looked terrified, like I'd lost my mind. But I wasn't crazy this time. For 40 years, I had imagined his face at every age, as a child, a teenager, a man. But seeing him, hearing him speak, it was real. He was real. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every second of that broadcast in my head. His voice, his mannerisms, the way he said Sarah Hale. Every detail burned into my memory. I knew it couldn't be coincidence. The years, the name, the eyes, all of it fit. By morning, I had a plan. I called my niece Jessica, my sister's daughter, the only family I had left. She was a teacher, smart, patient, the kind of person who could think clearly when I couldn't. I told her everything, the show, the man, the name. At first, she thought it was just another cruel trick of fate. "Auntie, you've had false hopes before," she said carefully. But I cut her off. "Not this time. I know my own child's face." Jessica drove over within the hour, her laptop under her arm. She sat beside me on the couch and started searching online. Within minutes, she found the station's website. There he was, Mark Jensen, age 41, engineer from Los Angeles, seeking his birth family. Under his picture was a note. Adopted as an infant from an unnamed small town in Oregon in 1985. Oregon, 1985. My hands started shaking so badly, Jessica had to hold the mouse for me. She found his social media, his professional profile, even photos of his family, a wife, 2 children, my grandchildren, and I didn't even know their names. Jessica looked at me with tears in her eyes. Auntie, I think it really is him. We called the television station that afternoon. The woman who answered was polite but cautious. She said she couldn't give me personal contact details for privacy reasons, but she promised to forward my information to him. I thanked her, but after we hung up, fear crept in. What if he never called? What if he didn't believe me? What if that woman, Rebecca or Sarah or whoever she was, had poisoned him against me with lies? I spent the next 3 days glued to the phone, jumping every time it rang. Nothing. Each silence felt like losing him all over again. Then, on the 4th afternoon, just as I was about to step outside to get the mail, the phone rang. "Hello?" My voice was trembling. "Mrs. Holloway?" The voice on the other end was calm, deep. My knees nearly gave out. "Yes, this is she. This is Mark Jensen. I received your message from the station." I couldn't speak for several seconds. He continued, "You said you believe I might be your son?" "I don't believe," I whispered. "I know." There was silence. Then he sighed. "I read what you wrote. It's a lot to take in. The woman who raised me was the kindest person I've ever known. She told me my biological mother didn't want me." "She lied," I said firmly. "I never stopped wanting you." He hesitated, his tone guarded but curious. "If what you're saying is true, tell me something only my real mother would know." I took a deep breath. "You were born at home in Seaside, Oregon. You have a small birthmark behind your right ear, shaped like a half moon, and you had a blue blanket with your initials, EB, stitched by hand. I made it myself." Another long silence. Then, softly, "She kept that blanket all these years. I thought it was hers." Tears blurred my vision. "Because she stole it," I said. "She stole you, my darling boy." He didn't hang up. He didn't shout. He just whispered, almost to himself, "My mother's name was Sarah Hale." "Yes," I said. "And before that, she was Rebecca." I could hear his breathing, uneven now. "If this is true, I don't know who I've been all my life." "You've been my son," I said quietly, "even when I couldn't hold you." The line stayed silent for a long moment, and then he said, "I need to see you." And just like that, after nearly 40 years of darkness, a single spark lit the end of the tunnel. I hadn't slept the night before we were supposed to meet. My body was 78, but my heart beat like a frightened girl's. He had suggested the park near the old church, neutral ground, open space, public. I ironed my best blue dress, the same shade as the blanket I once wrapped him in. The fabric trembled in my hands. Jessica drove me there. "Breathe, Auntie," she kept saying, but breathing felt impossible. What if he didn't believe me? What if he took one look and saw nothing familiar? When we arrived, the plaza was bright with sunlight. I sat on a bench under a fig tree, hands clasped tight around my purse. Inside it, I had the few treasures I'd saved, the photo, a copy of his birth certificate, and the other half of his baby booties. Then I saw him, a tall man walking slowly from across the square, scanning the benches. Even from a distance, I recognized the shape of his shoulders, the same as Daniel's. Every step he took felt like a heartbeat returning after 40 years of silence. He stopped a few feet away. "Mrs. Holloway?" I nodded. My mouth was too dry to speak. He extended a cautious hand. "I'm Mark." His voice cracked slightly on his own name, as if he wasn't sure who he was anymore. I shook his hand. It was warm, solid, real. "Please sit," I said, moving aside on the bench. He sat, keeping a polite distance. He carried a folder under his arm. I could see he was nervous, but so was I. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Only the rustle of leaves and the faint sound of children playing in the distance. "I brought the papers," he said finally. "The ones I found after she passed." He opened the folder. Inside were documents yellowed with time, a birth certificate with erased names, a vaccination card where one name had been crossed out, and another written over it. Ethan Brooks had become Mark Jensen. "She said the clerk made a mistake," he murmured. "She made sure the world believed that," I answered. He stared at the documents, then at me. "You said you have photos?" I took out the small envelope and handed it to him. His fingers trembled as he pulled the pictures free. Ethan at 3 months, 6 months, sitting on the kitchen floor with a spoon in his hand. His lips parted, but no sound came out. "That's the same kitchen from the photo I found in her things," he said slowly. "The wallpaper, it's identical." He placed one photo next to another on the bench, my old Polaroid and his copy, two halves of the same moment. "This is her," he said, pointing at Rebecca's blurred face behind the baby. "Sarah Hale." "Yes," I whispered. "That's her. Only she wasn't Sarah back then." He rubbed a hand over his face. "She told me I was abandoned at a hospital, that she found me through the church adoption program. She said you didn't want me." "I never stopped wanting you," I said. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. He looked at me for the first time. Really looked. His eyes searched mine as if trying to find something familiar. Then he said quietly, "I see it now. The eyes. The way you move your hands. She had your photo all these years. I found it hidden in her Bible." The ground seemed to tilt under me. She had kept my photo. A thief who couldn't let go of her guilt. Mark turned to me again. "I don't know what to feel," he confessed. "The woman who raised me was kind. She gave me everything, but she built it on a lie." "She stole you," I said softly. "But she didn't destroy you. That's what matters." He was silent, eyes glistening. Then, from the folder, he pulled out something small, wrapped in a handkerchief. A single blue baby bootie, faded and worn. She said it was mine. I always wondered who made it. I reached into my purse and took out its twin. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Two tiny pieces of yarn, finally reunited after decades. His voice broke. "So it's true." "Yes," I whispered. "It's true, my darling boy." He looked up, tears running down his cheeks, and before I could think, he leaned forward and hugged me. The smell of his cologne mixed with the salt of my tears. His arms were strong, unfamiliar, yet completely mine. "I don't know how to call you," he said against my shoulder. "What you feel," I replied. He pulled back, wiping his face. "Mom," he said quietly, testing the word, then again, firmer. "Mom." I broke. All the years of silence, the sleepless nights, the questions, the anger, they poured out in that single moment. I cried not from sorrow, but from release. After a while, he stood up, holding my hands. "We'll do the DNA test," he said. "I need proof for the world, but in my heart, I already know." I nodded. "I waited 40 years for you. I can wait a few more days." He smiled faintly, a shy, uncertain smile that was both man and child. "You haven't changed in my dreams," he said. As he walked away toward his car, the sunlight caught the back of his head, and for a heartbeat I saw Ethan again, the baby who used to splash water and giggle in the tub. The same small flick of hair, the same soft turn of the neck. I whispered to the wind, "You came back to me, my love." For the first time in decades, the silence around my house didn't sound empty. It sounded like peace waiting to bloom. I hardly slept the night before the test. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps from the past. I kept touching the little blue booty on my nightstand, afraid that if I blinked, it might vanish, and this miracle with it. Mark called early in the morning. "The lab's ready for us," he said. His voice was steadier than mine. "If you're still up for it." "As long as I'm breathing, I'll be up for it," I answered. He picked me up an hour later. Seeing him again, the lines on his face, the way his hand rested on the steering wheel, it felt like being given back a piece of myself. There was no awkwardness this time, just a quiet current running between us. We drove to Los Angeles in near silence. I watched him from the passenger seat, the same brown hair, the same curve of his jaw. How many birthdays, how many scraped knees had I missed? 40 years' worth. At the clinic, a nurse took our samples quickly. A simple swab inside the cheek. That's all it took to test a lifetime of pain. 2 weeks for the results, she said. 2 weeks. I'd already waited 40 years. 2 more felt both unbearable and insignificant. Outside, the sun was sharp, almost too bright. Mark's wife, Claire, was waiting by the car. She was younger than I expected, with kind eyes and a cautious smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Holloway," she said, shaking my hand gently. "Mark's told me everything." "Just call me Nora," I said. "Mrs. Holloway makes me sound like someone from the cemetery." We went to a small diner nearby, the kind with old photos on the walls and the smell of coffee soaked into everything. Mark ordered for everyone without asking, like a man who'd done it 1,000 times. Watching him talk to the waitress, I noticed he had Daniel's mannerisms, polite, calm, always looking people in the eye. Claire asked about my life, my work, the town I'd never left. I told her bits and pieces, the pharmacy, the church, the neighbors who'd grown old around me. Mark listened silently, his coffee untouched, his gaze fixed on the table. When I mentioned the blue room where I used to rock him to sleep, he finally spoke. "You never changed the room?" "No," I said. "I couldn't. It was the only place that still smelled like you." He swallowed hard, then looked out the window. Claire reached under the table and squeezed his hand. It broke my heart, not the gesture itself, but how natural it was. She was the one who'd seen him grow, who'd soothed his fears, who'd shared his life. She'd earned the right to comfort him. After lunch, they drove me back home. Before I got out, Mark said, "Would it be okay if I called you before the results come in?" "Of course," I said, "even if it's just to talk about the weather." He smiled for the first time that day. Deal. The following days passed like years. Every ring of the phone made my heart stop. I tried to occupy myself, gardening, knitting, praying, but nothing filled the emptiness between moments. On the 9th day, he called. "Mom," he stopped himself. "Nora, are you home? I found something." His voice trembled, half fear, half discovery. "What is it?" I asked, gripping the receiver. "I went through the last of her things. There's a letter, addressed to you." I froze. "To me?" "Yes. It's dated 1983, the year she took me." He read it slowly over the phone. "Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. You loved him first, but I loved him too. I couldn't bear to leave him in a world that had already broken me. I swear to God I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to be a mother. Please don't hate him for what I've done. Let him live free of this sin." He stopped. Silence hung heavy on the line. "She must have written it before she disappeared," I whispered. "Maybe she was planning to send it." "She kept it hidden all these years," he said. "Maybe guilt was her punishment." Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he said softly, "I think she really did love you, in her own broken way." "Maybe she did," I admitted. "But love built on lies always ends in pain." 2 weeks later, he called again. "The results are ready," he said. "I haven't opened them. I'm coming to Malibu." When he arrived, the envelope was in his hands. His eyes were red, but his voice was calm. "Let's do it together." We sat in my living room, the same room where his crib once stood. I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall, marking the seconds that separated us from the truth. He tore the envelope open and read silently. His lips moved, his brow furrowed. Then his expression softened. He looked up at me, eyes glistening. "It's you," he said. "It's really you. 99.99%. I felt my breath leave me, as if 40 years of grief had been exhaled at once. Tears blurred my vision. He leaned forward and pulled me into his arms. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry it took me so long." I clung to him like a lifeline. "You came back. That's all that matters." We stayed like that for what felt like hours. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were steady, full of peace I hadn't seen before. "Claire wants to bring the kids next week," he said with a smile. "They'd like to meet their grandma." I laughed through my tears. "Tell them I make the best apple pie in the state. That should convince them." For the first time in 4 decades, I felt whole again. The ghosts had finally left my house. That following Sunday, the sea breeze felt different, lighter, warmer, as if even the wind knew something in my world had finally been set right. I woke early, baked 2 pies, and aired out the blue room for the first time in 40 years. It no longer felt like a shrine of pain, but a place waiting for laughter again. They arrived just after noon. I heard the sound of a car door, then small feet racing up the path. A boy's voice shouted, "Grandma, we're here!" And before I could even open the door, a pair of skinny arms wrapped around my waist. It was Liam, 10 years old, with eyes that mirrored Mark's. Behind him stood a little girl, curls bouncing as she tried to balance a box in her hands. "We brought flowers," she said proudly. "Daddy said you like blue ones." I knelt and hugged them both, their laughter filling every corner of the porch that had once only known silence. Mark and Claire followed, smiling, carrying bags and nervous energy. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The children's chatter, the smell of pie cooling on the counter, the man who used to be my baby, now holding his daughter's hand. Time, the cruelest thief, had returned a piece of what it once stole. "Come in," I said, my voice trembling with joy. "Welcome home." We ate together at the old oak table that Daniel built decades ago. I told them small stories, how Mark, or Ethan, as I had called him then, used to splash water everywhere during his baths, how his laugh filled the house. The kids listened wide-eyed. "Daddy was a baby once?" Ava asked, astonished. "He was," I smiled. "The loudest baby in Malibu." She giggled. "I can believe that." After lunch, Mark asked if he could see the blue room. We walked there quietly, side by side. The sunlight poured through the same window where the moonlight had once shone on his crib. Nothing much had changed. The wooden shelf, the faded wallpaper with tiny clouds, the teddy bear still sitting on the chair. He stood in the doorway for a long time, saying nothing. Then he crossed the room, picked up the bear, and pressed it against his chest. "She left this behind," he murmured. "It still smells faintly like lavender." "It was your favorite," I said. "You wouldn't sleep without it." He turned, and for a moment I saw the same look he had as a baby, that half-confused, half-curious stare that used to melt me. "You kept everything," he said softly. "I had nothing else to hold on to." He nodded, eyes glistening, and placed the bear gently back on the chair. "You don't have to wait anymore," he said. "I'm here now." The words hit me like a prayer answered at last. I didn't even realize I was crying until he wiped the tears from my face. "Don't cry, Mom," he said. "You did it. You found me." That evening, the children helped me water the garden. Ava followed a butterfly, while Liam tried to dig up worms. The sun dipped low, bathing everything in gold. Claire sat beside me on the porch steps, watching them play. "He's been lighter these past weeks," she said quietly. "It's like a weight's been lifted." "It's been lifted for both of us," I replied. "He was the missing piece of my soul." Claire smiled. "He told me you forgave her, Rebecca." "I did," I said. "Not because she deserved it, but because carrying hate for 40 years was killing me. She took my child, but she also raised him with love. That's something I can't ignore." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the children's laughter echo through the yard. Then Claire asked, "Do you believe in fate?" "I used to curse it," I said. "Now I think it just took the long road home." When twilight fell, they prepared to leave. Ava hugged me so tightly I thought my heart would burst. "We'll come back next week, Grandma," she promised. "You better," I said, smiling through tears. "There'll be pie waiting." Mark lingered on the porch after everyone was in the car. The sound of cicadas filled the air, and the scent of ocean salt drifted from the cliffs. "I wish I'd known you sooner," he said. "You know me now," I replied, "and that's enough." He kissed my forehead, something he'd never done before, and whispered, "I love you, Mom." Then he got in the car and drove away, taillights fading into the distance like two small stars swallowed by night. I stood there until the sound of the engine disappeared. For the first time in 4 decades, the silence didn't hurt. It was soft, gentle, the kind that follows peace. Inside, I sat by the window, the same one where I'd once cried for years, and looked at the moon rising over the hills. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. The air was warm, alive, filled with echoes of laughter that would return. I picked up my old notebook, the one where I had once written, "Ethan's first word, Ethan's first tooth." On the last empty page, I wrote, "He came home." Then I closed it, placed it on the shelf, and whispered a final prayer, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. Because after 40 years of darkness, light had finally found its way back into my home. And for the first time in my life, I slept without dreams.